So our third speaker is Ulrich Morgenstern. I'm very glad to present him to you as a colleague. He's a professor at the Institute for Ethnomusicology and Folk Music Research of the University of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna, Austria. He's the chair of History and Theory of Folk Music. And one of his focuses in research is Russia and traditions there. The title of his paper today is Multipart Music, a Social Interaction in Russian Ethnomusicology, with some remarks on structural hierarchies of combined vocal and instrumental performance. Ulrich?
Thank you very much, Adrian, for this nice introduction, and thank you for Larry again. I'm very happy for being here and speak to you about some old, new topics. Contemporary research on multipart music focuses not only on specific styles and texture of music, but also on a specific multipart thinking of the Homo polyphonicus, Isali Semtsovsky, and also of social processes of music making, collective finding of music, as Boris Asafiev puts it. These are issues, of course, very highly developed in this study group, and I am very happy to participate. So in Russian ethnomusicology and folk music research, these approaches were developed very early. In the following, I'm going to give an overview on how Russian scholarship deals with performance processes in traditional vocal multipart practice. I also will very shortly put these results in relation with my own observations in some leading instrumental and instrumental vocal genres from different regions. Theoretical preconditions of Russian studies on multipart music. Two paradigmatical concepts are crucial to Russian research on multipart music. First, ethnomusicology of the individual. Second, sociology approach. The individual paradigm in ethnomusicology, performer-centered research, is a fundamental method and powerful theoretical concept in European and US American ethnomusicology and folkloristics. It was established in Russian epic studies 150 years ago. The so-called Russian School of Folkloristics paid particular attention to biography of storytellers and lamenters, as well as of their individual methods of creation. In early 20th century, Irish Anglo-American ballad studies took a similar way. Some later, Konstantin Brailoiu, followed by Albert Lord, Hungarian US-American performer studies and applied folkloristics from '65, Hungarian and Romanian dance anthropology, Martin Georgescu Felföldi, and finally European ethno-organology, starting in the '70s. Second, sociological approaches in Russian research. Sociological issues and methods are fundamental to Russian ethnomusicology and folkloristics as well. They were developed in three directions. A, folklore as a key as a means of sociology and history. In mid-19th century, Russian liberal intellectuals focused on folklore text as key to mental history and to an adequate understanding of the contemporary social life of the common people. B, music as culture, music in culture. For Russian Ukrainian ethnomusicologists like Yevgeny Gipius and Clement Kvitka, instead of collecting preferred genres, contemporary social changes and corresponding processes in style and repertoire became crucial issues. They encouraged and carried out continuous studies in one location for a comprehensive observation of musical life. This is actually the text when Clement Kwitka in 1928 first time used the term ethnomusicology. It was in French language. Precisely the same did in Romania Constantin Preloiu. Unfortunately, in the Soviet Union, under Stalin and in Ceausescu's Romanian, these anthropological and sociological studies were banned and folkloristics reduced to philological analysis. Third, performance is social action. Studies of Russian multipart music from the very beginning were initially based on observations on music making as a social process. Yevgenia Linyova was not the first researcher in this field, but she carried out the most detailed study, followed by Asafiev and his disciples, Evgeny Gipius and many others. Russian music anthropologist and multipart singing. Linyova, as a folklorist of the Russian school, Linyova paid exceptional attention to local performers of lyrical songs. The Russian schools more on epics. She speaks very seriously about their concepts and artistic abilities, as well as of competent listeners she refers to as connoisseurs, znataki, and critics. She also approaches to those local critics both for selecting performers for phonographic documentation as well as for evaluation, the recordings. In Linyova's concept, the interrelation of the social and the individual is very important. Not accidentally, Max Weber was fascinated by her observations and in detail referred to them. As Linyova writes, the texture of the folk song gives full freedom to the individual singer. Here is united the role as average and outstanding singers. Here we are faced with another important finding, the differentiation between average and outstanding singers. The latter are able to join in the performance of a song not heard before, as Linyova could demonstrate with experimental field methods. But most of all, according to Linyova, outstanding singers are characterized by melodious virtuosity and inventiveness. This is an English translation from 1998. The fancy of the peasant singer follows its own free will, and he follows constantly, introduce unexpected changes in the rendering of the song. But evidently, this freedom has its limits. If a singer oversteps them, he is immediately pulled up by his fellow singers with, "You had better to leave this corkscrews alone and speak up straighter," or "Don't turn it inside out," and such like admonitions. Thus, Linyova not only celebrated creative improvisation, but was also well aware about its limitations and of the emic concepts of these limitations. Boris Asafiev, of particular interest for our topic, is the Russian composer and music philosopher Boris Asafiev. His Gestalt concept of intonatia refers to basically melodic units in its vibrant performance and social perception and evaluation. The strongest inspiration Asafiev took from first Johann Sebastian Bach and second the Russian so-called protracted songs, lyrical songs. It is obviously due to his extended interdisciplinary research in North Russian in the 20s when he writes, the practice of folk music unites invention and immediate demonstration in communication with the listeners, among which there are not only sensitive arbiters, but exceptionally experienced connoisseurs. On the other hand, Asafiev found a high degree of inventiveness in instrumental music. While Asafiev and Linyova were fascinated with the freedom of improvisation, two disciples of Asafiev in the latter, after systematic field studies on social and artistic processes of multipart singing, made a case for the limitations of improvisation, mentioned already by Linyova. Gippius acknowledged improvisation insofar as peasant singers frequently change the melody from one to another strophe or from one to another performance. However, one should not think that improvisation is, in this case, is of any spontaneous or accidental character. That it has anything in common with ideas of improvisation, let's say of a salon improvisation on the piano or another improvisation by inspiration. For instance, when accompanying a motion picture. Improvisation varying does not mean the invention of new melodic motifs, intonatie, in the moment of singing, but in alternating several variations of the motive in questions preserved in the memory of the singer. I think we all know these superficial judgments about improvisation, and then you have a closer look and mentioned it is really limited. Another important observations of Gippius and Ewald is the distinction not only between average and outstanding singers, but also of different types of ensembles and local traditions of performance. Further, they could find out that the lead singer, Sepivalo, of the ensemble not only chooses the pitch, the tempo, but even the scale, which is often subjected to variation. As an example, we will listen to the Dmitri Prokofsky ensembles singing by a transcription from Linyova. Unfortunately, Linyova, so to say the Russian Bartok, from her about 1,000 phonographs, there's only 2 published until now. I don't know why. If compared with the situation in Lithuania, okay. Example for virtuous melismatic singing. It is typical for small ensembles. 2 singers usually sing more virtuous than 3 or 4 or 5. And so maybe this could be an exceptional performance. And now from the same district, a more recent field recording. As you can easily mention, the Prokofsky revival ensembles had a bit cleaned up the pitches according to just or temperated singing. Here's Linyova's transcription. Next, Isali Zimtsovsky. Most of you maybe know him. Well-known Russian-American ethnomusicologist Zimtsovsky combined structural analysis if lyric songs with developing Asafiev musical philosophy. A part-singing ensemble consists of individuals, each of whom possesses polyphonic inner hearing. I'm inclined to agree with Anna Rudnieva, who claimed that in actuality, a singer in a group sings one part, but at the same time, everyone of this very group, being engaged in choral performance, sings the song entirely and polyphonically by his/her inner hearing. And then he refers to her observation on Anna Rudnieva that if something goes wrong in the ensemble, an experienced singer can immediately join in the part to correct it. And he also very nicely refers to Lignova, who described a cooperative situation. The old man sang a bit too virtuose for the youngs, with flourishes and achs, so this expressive melismatic. And the young say, "Daddy, do not sing so." Who did not grasp the sense of this side. Why not, explained an older singer, "Daddy, sing. He does it well in according with us. He helps us." This is a very important notion. Collective, cooperative music making in a sense of helping each other. You can find this quite often in traditional terminology. Okay, some later, Alexander Mosias, also from the Petersburg School of Isali Simtsovsky Institute of the History of the Arts. He's now living in Israel as a composer. I couldn't find too much information about him. He did an important contribution to sociomusicological study of folk polyphony. He made a point for the study of the mechanism of social and psychological factors of performance. For many years, he worked with a vocal ensemble from the Kirisha district of the Leningrad province. Systematically inquiring the 6 female singers, Mosias could show that there are 2 leading figures. The others are listening to during performance. 2 others were characterized as more problematical for disturbing others. So the same questions were put to any members and then anonymized. An analysis of the melodic materials showed that the 2 leaders had the richest reservoir of melodic variants, but the weaker singers gave also valuable insights. Mistakes and shortcomings of performers and performance, sometimes seemingly, are not less instructive than creative highlights. He has also observed that weak voices of some performers, due to conditions of health and age, became more stronger when singing in the ensemble. Very short example of this very ensemble recorded some years later. So, summarizing the basic analytical concepts of vocal multipart music in Russian ethnomusicology are studying collective singing, both a social process and artistic creativity. Second, distinction between outstanding and average performers and ensembles. Traditional functions and structural hierarchies within the ensembles. Studying audiences. Studying the evaluation of performance, aesthetical judgment, A, by the members of the ensemble, B, by the audience, particularly by experts who may or may not be singers themselves. And finally, improvisation as choice and combination of readily prepared variants. So, what's about instrumental music? Very short. Something is very similar. The cooperation and ensemble, the contrasting texture, helping each other when, for example, accordion player plays, singer sings. But let's at first have a very short glance at one purely instrumental tune. So this musician, he never repeats more than 6 bars. This plays much more straight. The same tune, the same region, and one is a total extreme, highly developed improviser, and he doesn't improvise at all, maybe at some micro level. So the first is an example for so to say, just a moment. Asynchronous polyphony, when the singer joins in, asymmetrical periods and symmetrical in the second. And what happens when asymmetrical periods is combined with singing? It seems very chaotic. Sometimes this is very clear when you have to join in, and sometimes it's different. Maybe half a minute.
Умру поле брани, а та я пел.
Ой,
Ах, моя драля, не забудь, ты разукрась мою могилушку. Ах, тебя там каким-нибудь.
So we have a totally asynchronic texture, sometimes very well coordinated and sometimes improvised, but with some basic orientation of harmony. It is, they usually join in so that the vocal and the instrumental part will give more harmony if they would join in whenever. So there's some regulation even in this seemingly chaotical texture. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ulrich, also for bringing us to not so known traditions of research by many of us, I guess. So the floor is open for comments, questions. Yes, Larry?
Thank you. Thank you, Ulrich. Fabulous paper. I have a question for you in the sense that what is your perception as an expert in your field of improvisation? Because you've been looking at improvisation in multipart music, and in particular in that area. And how would you examine and describe what exactly is improvisation and how it is changed in terminology to your research thinking? Thank you.
Okay, concerning vocal genres, I referred more to the research of Russian researchers. I'm basically engaged in instrumental music, and how it is reflected in terminology. It is even hard to say, but it has something with cooperation. And this instrumental vocal genres, the basic is the instrument, and the vocal is the secondary part who can or cannot join in. And the very phenomenon of improvisation, yes, it is highly appreciated if a musician has a big reservoir of melodic variants and freely combines them. This is very important for being a good musician. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Tony, so please a microphone here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrich. I'm afraid I might ask one of my very long, complicated questions again. I'm very interested in the idea of improvisation by drawing out previously known fragments. So the improvisation is not in creation of new material, but in spontaneous organization of material. The other culture that I know very well that does this is the Dagbamba drumming tradition in Ghana, where drummers have a certain, I explain it as a menu. Each drummer has a menu of possible phrases that they can play, and they choose always from the menu. They can't play anything outside that menu. There is a very good reason for that, and that is because every drum, every line is saying something, every drum is replicating language, so they cannot just make up new material because it becomes nonsense. So my question is, based on that understanding, a two-part question. Is there any such limitation in this tradition that limits what people can do in improvisation, limits the choices that they have? And the other side is, if that's not the case, is there ever spontaneous creation of new material?
I think it is more instrumental than in vocal music, spontaneous creation, with the exception of vocal imitation of instrumental music. There are also very interesting examples. And sometimes really instrumentalists create more new motives than vocalists. And there are quite strict restrictions to the scale when singing and when using an instrument. So, the scale, yeah.
Yes, Ignacio.
Oh yes, very interesting paper. Improvisation is a very dangerous word for musicological studies because there is a lot, very large literature about this idea of spontaneously in music. We know that in music there is nothing that is really spontaneous. But I would like to ask you something about the first part of your paper, about the studies you mentioned, the very interesting authors. But they had no relationship with the Western scholars. And for instance, when you showed the book of a lady, I don't remember the name, Lignova, there was in translation in English, and some the phrases that you quoted by her book are very close to the to sometime to a work by Ella Adajewski. Do you know her, Ella Adajewski? She was from Croatia and Croatia, and she studied North Italy polyphonic music, more or less the same years, and more or less the ideas are more or less the same. Do you know something about a possible relationship between these?
The contacts were very intensive up to the First World War. Thank you. Liniova, he took part in the International Musicological Conference in Vienna in 1999. And actually, it was Edison himself who gave her this phonograph for first recordings. So the contacts were very intensive. But then the First World War and the takeover of the Bolshevik ended all these contacts.
Okay, we have time for one last question or comment. Or yes, Anna?
Thank you, Ulrich, for a very interesting paper. Coming back to the improvisation, have you asked sometime to these musicians, I guess you have met them very, very often, about why do they do like this, about this improvisation? Because I have had in my practice as well, there are some improvisers and some direct players. Thank you.
It's really individual distinction, very important. It's the same with the epic singers, as they found out 150 years ago, improvisers and composers. Okay, the terminology is problematical. It is hard to say. It's always hard to ask a musician or an expert in the field, why do you this and do not this? It is not so easy, but structural analysis shows that this and some musicians have a big deal of improvisation. And if you have 4 or 5 records from several times, can compare from one musician, of course, then it is easier to speak about improvisation than if you have only one. Of course I tried, but yes, they say, I ask how did you learn how to play, and he's more than 60 years old, playing about 40 years, 45 years old. I'm still learning. And they are speaking of new ideas, took some motive of these musicians and so on, but about the very creative process, this is really very hard to discuss it with them. I tried, of course, but the result is maybe not so rich than in other topics I could exchange with them. I could listen to them and discuss.
Okay, thank you very much, Ulrich. Thank you, Songül. Thank you, Daiva,
Thank you.
for all the session.